You're listening to the Scripture Nomad podcast, where we explore and explain a range of biblical passages. In this episode, we take a look at chapter 2 of the Gospel of Matthew. It is a discussion of the visit of the wise men to Jesus, followed by the move of the family to Egypt to avoid the wrath of King Herod, and the eventual choice of Nazareth as the place where Jesus and family would settle. In the previous episode, we heard about Joseph's quandary when Mary, his betrothed, was found to be pregnant, but not by him. Today, we're turning our attention to the surprise visit by wise men from the east to Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, and how the family had to flee to Egypt before eventually settling in Nazareth in Israel. These activities, together with the evil deeds of Herod the Great, are described in chapter 2 of the Gospel of Matthew. Let's start by reading the text. Here's Matthew chapter 2 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. The visit of the wise men. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. The flight to Egypt. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child, to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Herod kills the children. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted, because they are no more. The return to Nazareth. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose and took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. Let's unpack Matthew chapter 2. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and not in Joseph and Mary's hometown of Nazareth. The couple had journeyed 90 miles, or 145 kilometers, south to Bethlehem to be registered according to the decree of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. Why Bethlehem and not Nazareth? It was because Joseph was a descendant of King David, and Bethlehem had been David's hometown. Mary took the difficult journey to Bethlehem while pregnant with Jesus, and the birth took place in such humble circumstances that the newborn Jesus was placed in an animal's feeding trough or manger to sleep, because there was no room at the inn. You can read about the reason for their trip and the birth of Jesus in chapter 2 of Luke's Gospel. Several months later, the family was living in a house in Bethlehem, indicating that Joseph was carrying on his carpentry trade there. Then came a surprise visit. Men from a nation to the east of Israel arrived at the house. These were the wise men, often referred to as the Magi. They were likely from Persia, and if so, had traveled a distance of about 1,300 miles, or 2,000 kilometers, to worship the King of the Jews. What caused them to take such a long journey, probably riding on camels and camping on the way? It would have taken them several months through difficult terrain. The reason they gave when they arrived in Jerusalem, not Bethlehem, was that they had seen the star of the King of the Jews when it rose, and had come to worship him. The wise men were probably Gentile astronomers who had been studying the night sky. Somehow God had communicated to them what the star represented and urged them to visit the newborn King of the Jews. They arrived in Jerusalem, probably expecting a king to be born in a royal palace. There is no indication in the text that the wise men had to follow a star to find their way to Jerusalem. Once in Jerusalem, they asked around as to where the one born King of the Jews was to be found. Herod the king heard about it and was troubled. Herod was about 70 years old but was insecure in his role as king, to the point of paranoia. He had been appointed king of Judea by the Roman Senate. He was not fully Jewish. He was an Idumean or Edomite, though he observed Jewish customs. He was not popular. He was known for his brutality. He killed all the members of the Sanhedrin when he ascended the throne. His marriage to Mariamne had been politically motivated. It was part of Herod's strategy to legitimize his rule over Judea by aligning himself with the royal Hasmonean family, who were his rivals and more accepted by the Jewish people. Eventually, he murdered his wife and 3 of his children. He ordered that all the noblemen in Jerusalem should be killed upon his death, in order that there might be weeping in Jerusalem at his passing. But this order was not carried out. On his good side, Herod was a competent administrator and a notable builder. He rebuilt and expanded the Second Temple, but also built pagan temples. He built fortresses and a harbor at Caesarea. On hearing about the inquiry of the wise men about the King of the Jews, Herod assembled the chief priests and scribes to learn from them where the Christ was to be born. They identified Bethlehem as the prophesied birthplace of the Christ, citing chapter 5, verse 2 of the Old Testament book of Micah. Bethlehem was and still is a small town situated on a hill about 6 miles or 10 kilometers south of Jerusalem. Herod inquired of the wise men as to when the star had appeared, then sent them to Bethlehem, along with instructions to report back to himself when they had located the child. Herod claimed that he wanted to worship the new King of the Jews, but due to his paranoia about any perceived threats to his throne, murder, and not worship was his true intention. On the journey of the wise men from Jerusalem towards Bethlehem, the star reappeared and then came to rest above the house where Joseph and family were living. Exactly what the star was is not clear. Was it a normal star or a specially created light? There are different opinions about that, but either way it served the purpose of guiding the wise men to the house where the child Jesus lived. The wise men were delighted to see the star again. They went into the house and fell down and worshiped Jesus. They offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That there were 3 kinds of gifts does not mean that there were exactly 3 wise men. There could have been more than 3 or only 2. Matthew does not provide the actual number. The gifts were appropriate for the roles of Jesus: gold for royalty, frankincense for a priest, and myrrh, perhaps foreshadowing Jesus' crucifixion, because it was associated with the embalming of a corpse. The wise men were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they took a different way out of Judea when going back to their own country. After the departure of the wise men, Joseph was instructed in a dream to urgently flee to Egypt to avoid the murderous wrath of Herod. Joseph immediately obeyed, and the family left for Egypt at night. Egypt was a safe area as Herod had no authority there. At the time, there were many Jews resident in Alexandria in the north of Egypt. The Jewish community in Alexandria was one of the largest in the ancient world outside of Judea. Joseph could have used the precious gifts from the wise men to provide for his family during their stay in Egypt. Matthew connects the stay of Joseph's family in Egypt with the prophecy in Hosea 11 verse 1, namely, Out of Egypt I called my son. The journey to Egypt reminds one of the lengthy stay of the children of Israel in Egypt more than 1,000 years earlier, followed by their eventual exodus. Massacre of the innocents. Herod was terribly angry after the wise men failed to report back to him because it would be more difficult for him to locate and kill Jesus. So he sent a band of his soldiers to kill all male infants under the age of 2. This event became known as the Massacre of the Innocents. It has been estimated that the number of boys killed was about 30, because Bethlehem was a small town. Matthew connects the massacre of the small children with the prophecy in Jeremiah 31, verse 15, of Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel, the favorite wife of Jacob, died after giving birth to Benjamin. You can read about it in Genesis 35, verse 19. She was buried next to the road linking Jerusalem with Bethlehem. The return to Nazareth. While in Egypt, Joseph received another dream instructing him to return to Israel because Herod was dead. Joseph obeyed, but then he heard that Archelaus, Herod's son, was ruling in Judea, so he was afraid. Archelaus was like his father Herod, but without Herod's good side. When he came to the throne, he murdered 3,000 rulers to safeguard his position. As a result of yet another dream, Joseph departed for the town of Nazareth in the northern district of Galilee. This was the 4th dream that Joseph had received in connection with Jesus. Matthew connects the move to Nazareth with a prophecy that Jesus would be called a Nazarene. There is no direct Old Testament prophecy to that effect, but perhaps it relates to the prophecies about Jesus being a branch, and the Hebrew word for branch is nezer, which sounds similar. The challenge. The challenge for us is, how do we respond to the risen Christ of today? Are we like the wise men, dropping everything and starting a long journey to find him and bringing worship and offerings? Or are we like Herod, who did not want another king to threaten his throne and murdered others to secure his own rulership? Or are we like Joseph, who responded in faith without hesitation when receiving divine instructions? That brings us to the end of chapter 2 of the Gospel of Matthew. Thanks for listening to the Scripture Nomad podcast. Please rate and follow this show, and don't forget to drop a comment on this episode. If you have any questions or comments, send an email to info@scripturenomad.com. Visit our website at scripturenomad.com. This episode was written by John Holder.